Miguel grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone and life was predictable and safe. He was the youngest of 3 children, and his parents, Carlos and Helena, were the perfect example of dedication and love. Carlos, a history teacher, and Helena, a nurse, were always present, actively participating in their children's lives. From an early age, Miguel proved to be a curious and intelligent child. He was the kind of boy everyone admired: polite, helpful, and always smiling. At school, he stood out not only for his good grades, but also for being a promising athlete on the football team. His classmates enjoyed his company, and his teachers often praised his performance and behavior. Miguel's weekends were filled with family activities, walks in the park, and visits to his grandparents. He also had a group of loyal friends, with whom he often played on sunny afternoons, exploring the nearby woods and streams. Miguel seemed to have a perfect life, surrounded by an environment of love and happiness. However, there was something about Miguel that no one could see. Sometimes, during games or even in class, he would have disturbing thoughts that he couldn't explain. Thoughts about pain, death, and violence. He would find himself imagining macabre scenarios, and although he tried to push these images away, they would return with more frequency and intensity. His parents, Carlos and Helena, noticed some small outbursts of anger in Miguel, especially when he didn't get what he wanted. They thought they were just phases of adolescence and that he would overcome them. When he began to show a peculiar interest in crime stories and mysteries, his parents and teachers attributed it to intellectual curiosity. Miguel hid these dark thoughts from others, fearing that he would be judged or considered abnormal. He maintained the facade of an ordinary boy, continuing to be the exemplary son, the loyal friend, and the dedicated student. But internally, he fought the growing darkness that threatened to consume him. There were moments when Miguel felt a deep discomfort, a restlessness that he couldn't explain. He wondered why he had these thoughts, why he couldn't be as completely happy as he seemed to be. This internal conflict, this duality between the perfect image everyone saw and the darkness he felt, was a constant battle. Thus, Miguel continued his life, balancing between light and shadow, without knowing that, on a cold winter night, everything would change. The fateful encounter in the dark alley would be the catalyst that would unleash the darkness within him, transforming him from a seemingly ordinary boy into a deadly predator. The perfect life he knew would crumble, revealing Miguel's true nature, a nature that was hidden deep within his soul, waiting to emerge. The night that changed everything for Miguel started like any other. He had gone out with his friends to a party at a colleague's house. The music was loud, the laughter was abundant, and Miguel was having fun as always. However, when the party ended, he decided to walk home, enjoying the tranquility of the night and the cool air that seemed to clear his mind. As he walked through the deserted streets, shrouded in a light fog, Miguel heard a sharp, disturbing sound, a cry for help. His heart sped up and he followed the sound, which led him to a dark, narrow alley. There, he saw a scene that would make him discover a part of himself that he had never imagined. A man was attacking a woman, his violent hands around her neck as she struggled desperately. Without thinking about the consequences, Miguel acted. He picked up a large rock from the ground and ran towards his attacker. With a powerful blow, he hit the man's head. The sound of the impact echoed through the alley, followed by the sound of the man's body falling to the ground. The woman, still in shock, managed to free herself and escape, leaving Miguel alone with the body. He stood there, panting, looking at the motionless man on the floor. Blood stained the stone in his hand, and a strange and intense sensation began to invade his body. Instead of feeling panic or guilt, Miguel felt a rush of adrenaline and power. It was as if something inside him had been released. That night, Miguel couldn't sleep. The image of the dead man kept coming back to him, not as a nightmare, but as a memory of a moment of ecstasy. He remembered the force with which he hit, the sound of the stone crushing the skull, the blood smeared across the floor. And strangely enough, he wanted to feel that again. In the following days, Miguel began to notice a change in himself. He was more attentive, more alive, as if he had discovered a new purpose. The event in the alley no longer seemed like an accident, but an awakening. He began looking for information about killers, studying their methods, their motivations. The fascination with crime stories that was once just a curiosity has turned into an obsession. Miguel knew he couldn't share these new sensations with anyone. He maintained his normal routine, continuing to be the exemplary son, the loyal friend, and the dedicated student. But internally, he was in constant turmoil. Visions of violence became more frequent, and the need to relive that feeling of power and control grew every day. Finally, Miguel gave in to his hunger. He chose his next victim, a beggar who lived on the city streets, someone he believed no one would miss. He studied the man's movements for days, planning every detail of the attack. And when the moment arrived, he acted with precision and coolness, killing the man quickly and with the same sense of ecstasy he felt in the alley. With this second murder, Miguel realized there was no return. He had crossed a line that separated the ordinary from the monstrous. He has become a predator, hunting in the shadows, always one step ahead of suspicion. And although he maintained the facade of a normal boy, Miguel knew he had become something completely different, something no one would ever suspect by looking at his smiling, innocent face. With the second murder, Miguel felt more powerful and more in control than ever. He realized that he had crossed a line that could not be undone. Now, he wasn't just a normal boy, he was a predator. With each passing day, his thirst for violence and control grew, and he dedicated himself to satisfying this dark need. Miguel began to observe his future victims with frightening precision. He spent hours walking around the city, analyzing people, looking for signs of vulnerability. His initial targets were those he believed no one would miss: beggars, addicts, lonely people. He studied their habits, routines, and moments of weakness. He planned every detail of the attack, ensuring that there were no clues that could lead to it. Each murder was meticulously planned and executed with precision. He chose isolated and deserted locations where he could act without being seen. His methods varied. Sometimes he used a knife, other times an improvised weapon. The important thing was the absolute control he felt in taking a life. The ecstasy he experienced during these moments was irreplaceable, and he became addicted to this sensation. Miguel developed a pattern to protect himself. He always wore gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints, burned his clothes after each murder, and discarded any weapons used in different locations. He also kept a detailed diary of his victims, recording each attack with clinical precision. This diary became his personal trophy, a reminder of his power and control. Despite the increasing violence, Miguel maintained the facade of a normal boy. At school, he continued to be the dedicated student and loyal friend. At home, he was the loving son his parents always knew. No one suspected that behind the innocent smile there was a calculating killer. The city, however, began to notice an increase in unexplained disappearances and deaths. Fear and paranoia spread, and police intensified their investigations. But Miguel was always one step ahead. He made sure his tracks were impossible to follow, and the police had no concrete leads to follow. Miguel's pleasure in killing came not only from the violence itself, but also from the cat and mouse game he played with the authorities. The adrenaline of almost being caught, the tension of always being under surveillance, it all fueled his hunger. He began taking more risks, attacking people in less isolated locations, always ensuring his cover remained intact. As his confidence grew, Miguel began to diversify his victims. No longer limited to the marginalized, he began targeting those closest to him. Schoolmates, neighborhood acquaintances, no one was safe. The adrenaline rush of hunting down someone he knew, someone who could recognize him, added to his pleasure even more. Miguel was meticulous and calculating, but he was also aware that one false step could be his undoing. He knew he needed to be extremely careful, but the hunger and pleasure he felt from killing were insatiable. Each new murder was a dangerous dance, a constant balance between absolute control and the risk of discovery. The young predator continued his double life, honing his dark abilities while maintaining the illusion of normality. He had become a master at hiding his intentions, manipulating everyone around him to keep his secret intact. But deep down, Miguel knew that the darkness inside him was an uncontrollable force that would eventually lead him to make a fatal mistake. As Miguel's murders became more frequent and daring, the city entered a state of fear and paranoia. Disappearances and unexplained deaths have become a constant topic in the news and in daily conversation. Families began locking their doors early, and streets once vibrant with life now seemed deserted after dark. The police, under pressure from the community and the media, intensified their investigations, but still had no concrete leads. Meanwhile, Miguel reveled in the chaos he had created. He watched with satisfaction the growing unrest around him, knowing that he was responsible for the atmosphere of terror. However, with each new murder, he also felt the tension increase. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, and any mistake could reveal his true nature. Miguel began to feel the pressure of constant persecution. He became increasingly paranoid, believing that at any moment he could be discovered. This fear, however, only increased his excitement. The adrenaline of being one step ahead of the authorities and the feeling of absolute power kept him hunting. He became more meticulous in his plans, but also more daring. His victims began to include people he knew personally, schoolmates, and even friends. The risk of being discovered increased the adrenaline rush he craved. Each murder became a game of intelligence and precision, where Miguel tested the limits of his own audacity. Miguel knew he needed to be extremely careful. He constantly monitored police investigations, adjusting his methods to avoid suspicion. He hacked police computers, read confidential reports, and anticipated investigators' movements. This constant vigilance required intense mental energy, but Miguel was willing to pay the price to continue his deadly game. The feeling of being followed or watched became a constant in Miguel's life. He began taking extra precautions, changing his daily routines, avoiding places where he might be recognized, and even changing his appearance when necessary. At home, he maintained his impeccable behavior, but internally, paranoia grew. One day, while walking through the city, Miguel noticed that one of his friends, Joao, was watching him with a suspicious expression. Joao was a longtime friend, someone who had always been there for him, but now he seemed different. Miguel felt a chill run down his spine. Did Joao suspect something? In the following days, Miguel began to observe Joao more closely, looking for signs that he was investigating his movements. He noticed that Joao asked subtle questions about the disappearances, mentioned details from the news, and seemed to always be around. Miguel's paranoia reached a new peak, and he knew he needed to act. One night, Miguel decided to confront Joao. They met in a local park, a place where they used to play as children. Miguel tried to keep the conversation casual, but the tension was palpable. Joao finally revealed his suspicions, mentioning the changes in Miguel's behavior and his unexplained absences. Feeling trapped, Miguel realized he had no other choice. He attacked Joao with the same precision and coldness that he had developed in all his previous murders. But this time, there was no pleasure, only despair. Miguel knew that killing his friend meant he was truly losing control. João fought, but Miguel was determined. After an intense fight, Miguel finally managed to subdue João, but not without leaving evidence. In his haste and fear, he made mistakes. He left footprints, struggle marks, and witnesses who heard the fight. With João's body at his feet, Miguel felt a deep emptiness, a darkness that he could no longer control. The police, alerted by João's disappearance, soon found the body and the evidence left behind. They began to put the pieces of the puzzle together, and for the first time, Miguel felt that the siege was closing. The perfect facade he maintained was about to crumble, and he knew it was only a matter of time before he was discovered. The discovery of João's body marked the beginning of the end for Miguel. Police, now with tangible evidence, stepped up their investigations and began connecting the dots between the murders. The footprints, the struggle marks, and the testimonies led investigators in a new direction, one that pointed directly to Miguel. At home, Miguel felt the pressure increasing. His parents, Carlos and Helena, noticed his restlessness, but could not understand what was happening. Miguel avoided eye contact and spent hours locked in his room, mentally reviewing every detail of his crimes and trying to find flaws that could incriminate him. One night, while his parents were sleeping, Miguel decided he needed to run away. He knew he couldn't continue living that double life, and the only way to avoid being captured was to disappear. He gathered as much money as he could, grabbed some essential belongings, and left a note for his parents, saying he needed time alone to think. Miguel fled to a distant city, where no one knew him. There, he tried to start a new life, away from the crimes and paranoia that consumed him. However, the darkness within him could not be erased. He continued to feel the same insatiable hunger and need for control that had driven him to kill. For months, Miguel managed to avoid capture, but the police never stopped looking for him. They knew the killer was on the run, and every clue led them closer to his whereabouts. The constant pressure began to wear Miguel down, and he knew it was only a matter of time before he was found. Finally, on a rainy morning, the police located Miguel in a dirty, isolated apartment. They burst in, finding him sitting on the floor, surrounded by newspapers detailing his crimes and the diary he kept recording each murder. Miguel did not resist arrest. He knew his escape had come to an end. During the trial, Miguel remained impassive, listening to the accusations and testimonies without showing emotion. His parents, devastated by the revelation that their son was a serial killer, were present but avoided looking at him. The details of Miguel's crimes shocked the community, and the sentence was swift and ruthless. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. In prison, Miguel faced the brutal reality of his actions. He was isolated from the world, without the possibility of continuing his cycle of violence. The insatiable hunger he felt was replaced by a deep emptiness and silent regret. He spent his days in his cell, remembering every moment of his life, every choice that had led him to that dark fate. Rumor has it that, even behind bars, the darkness inside Miguel never completely went away. He became a legend among prisoners, a feared and respected figure. Some said he was still planning, that in his mind he continued to hunt, waiting for the right moment to break free again. And so, Miguel lived out the rest of his days in prison, a caged predator, haunted by the ghosts of his victims and the insatiable hunger that could never be satisfied. The darkness that once consumed him was now his only companion, an eternal reminder that a monster's true nature can never be fully contained.